English.
Why isn't that man leader of the Labor Party? He's articulate, if not eloquent. He's got the best rhetorical hand movements in the business. And what's more, he's experienced. He's been a minister. He's run an election campaign. He came through the TV debates right up there with John Key. Why isn't he leader of the Labor Party? Wait, perhaps one day he will be. As my colleague said, Cunliffe for 2023.
A bit soon.
Well, there'll still be an opposition, but yeah, maybe a bit soon. But Mr. Speaker, what Mr. Cunliffe demonstrated is what is at the heart of the definition of a cult, and that is irrational and extraordinary self-belief. And David Parker was right. Actually, he exemplifies it more than most of them. He called the Labor Party a cult because they still believe that New Zealanders are in thrall to an extremist neoliberal centre-right government who deceived them in 2008. Helen Clark should still be Prime Minister, and tax deductibility of R&D is what's going to change the world. I disagree with my colleague Jonathan Coleman. You know, the other day he said they're in the 5th stage of grief. I don't think they are. I think they haven't yet reached the first stage, which is realising they lost the 2008 election because New Zealanders did not like their direction and policy. And how do we know they don't believe it? Because they campaigned on the same policies in 2014 as in 2008, what actually happened to be about the same policies they campaigned on in 1996, 1999, 2002 and 2005, Mr. Speaker. So the Labor Party one day will admit this basic fact. The voters are right, and it's Labor who's wrong, not the cultish belief that Labor is right and the voters are wrong. And actually we saw it on the campaign trail, because one of the reasons John Key led this government to a victory in that campaign was because of his fundamental belief in the capacity of New Zealanders to run their own lives and do what's best for New Zealand. And time and again on the campaign, when we were saying over the last 4 or 5 years New Zealanders have had to readjust the way they do things, they've made changes in their household, in their workplace, adjusted their debt, been careful with their spending, and we're headed in the right direction, the Labor Party was there saying, no, New Zealanders got it wrong, because they made their decisions when it should have been the government. It should have been us. They knew, we know best. And that's pretty simple. That's why they didn't vote for him. We saw it time and again. The Labor Party telling New Zealanders they've done it all wrong. Well, they haven't. They've done it all right. And we now have 6 former leaders in the Labor Party to demonstrate that probably in the long run the voters, they're holding out, but I think they will outlast the next Labor leadership reshuffle. It's not an election anymore, it's a reshuffle. You used to reshuffle spokesmen, but now you reshuffle leaders. Whose turn will it be? Is it Andrew? Is it Grant? Who lost the most weight? And that's the right name for the Labor leadership campaign is the biggest loser. Because whoever wins it will certainly lose the next one. That's how it's going to work, because that's what's happened with the last 3 or 4. The last 4 Labor leaders. So this Planet Labor, winning is losing. The only thing you know when you win the Labor Party leadership is you will certainly lose it. Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, the government is getting on with the job of building on the sustainability of this economy, and there's a number of promising indications, no guarantees, but promising indications that this economy can keep producing more jobs and higher incomes for a number of years. For instance, our concerns about inflation have moderated. We're unlikely to go into the kind of inflation spiral we went into in the mid-2000s under the Labor government. Inflation is moderating. Unemployment is dropping pretty consistently. That's why Kiwis are staying home. Unemployment's dropping here. It's going up in Australia. But that is another good sign, Mr Speaker. The fact that New Zealanders are staying home is another good sign. It also looks as if it's possible we'll have a slightly lower cycle in interest rates this time round. Our first mortgage rates won't reach 10% as they did in 2008. So, Mr Speaker, and the labour market is proving to be pretty flexible. We are able as a country to rebuild Christchurch. We've got enough people to do it, as well as growing our other businesses and growing employment. So, Mr Speaker, the government is working on the kind of policies that will underpin an extension of that sustainable economic growth. And we'll continue to focus on the business growth agenda, very ably run by my colleague Stephen Joyce. And that is a whole lot of detailed decisions that all add up to an environment where businesses will invest another dollar and employ another person. Where Kiwis with a bit of initiative realise it's going to be worthwhile stepping out and taking a risk. So we'll continue with the business growth agenda. And also we're going to focus on two other things that are really critical to the success of this economic cycle. One is to maintain slightly contractionary fiscal policy. One of the reassuring things about the election campaign was general political agreement that relatively tight fiscal policy is the right thing for this economy. Of course, the trick is when you're the government, you actually have to execute that. And we're in pretty good shape to do that, although it will be difficult. The last thing this economy needs is a government going on a spend-up. But if we're going to have tight fiscal policy, we have to really understand what drives the government's costs. And I want to recognise the efforts of my ministerial colleagues and our caucus through the last 4 or 5 years in holding to the line that we can produce better public services even with the same or less money, and that the measure of how much we care is not how much money we spend, it's what results we get. And that is at the core of our fiscal discipline. The key to smaller government is better government, not bigger government, but better government. And that means we will be focusing very strongly on families and communities, not on the traditional way of saying we spent $100 million with the Ministry of Education. That's how you know that we care. So, Mr Speaker, the government has a pretty challenging program. New Zealanders' expectations about the economy are high. They need to see this economy performing, and we're geared up to do what we can to ensure a high-performing economy. They also expect that we will get results for the $70 billion or so that they hand to us every year to spend on their behalf, and those results are going to get more challenging to achieve. Getting the first 10% more kids through NCA Level 2 is bound to be easier than the next 10%. It's going to require more cooperation with communities, more cooperation across government. And finally, Mr Speaker, can I just acknowledge the National Party team, an outstanding leader and the Prime Minister, but a team of MPs, candidates and volunteers who demonstrated the cohesion, the energy and the teamwork that New Zealand has now come to expect as the benchmark for government. They won't always agree with us in this term, but there is every commitment from this government to maintain the same kind of cohesive, team-driven government that respects New Zealanders and their efforts, that builds on their self-reliance and enterprise, and does its best on behalf of all New Zealanders to create a better country for them. And in particular, Mr Speaker, actually a superb quote from the Minister of Finance's maiden speech yesterday. I noticed how Mr Bishop cultivated favour with all the senior politicians that he's worked with over the years. He didn't leave any of them out. But Mr Speaker, coming into a third term, the government remains more committed and I believe more capable of dealing with some of the bigger challenges like long-term welfare dependency, like the ability of our businesses to grow sustainably over time through a business cycle. And, Mr Speaker, we look forward, I have to say, to the day when the Greens, New Zealand First and Labour get over their grief, get organised and start putting a bit of pressure on us. I'm just not sure how long that will take. At the moment, the signs aren't promising, but we will do better when they do better, and it's in the interests of the country that this hopeless rabble of an opposition gets their act together.
Dr Megan Woods.
Mr Speaker, why is that man not still leader of the National Party? After an address like that from Parliament's own master